Condemned by her town, Eliza is auctioned for $1, her life utterly worthless. $300! A growling voice bellows, silencing the callous crowd. A rugged mountain man claims her, but he sees a powerful detail nobody else noticed. Her very soul hangs in the balance. This unheard-of price will reshape her fate forever. In the dust-choked hollows where civilization clung precariously to the wild, the small village of Pine Ridge huddled like a coiled viper. Its name whispered of sheltering pines, yet offered little solace to those deemed outside its rigid confines. Here, the air itself seemed to carry the weight of unspoken judgments. Each gust of wind a sigh of disapproval against anything that dared to defy its narrow expectations. Eliza had known no other home, nor any genuine kindness within its borders. Orphaned and alone, her very presence had become an irritant, a constant reminder of charity that was never truly offered, only begrudgingly discussed. Her robust frame, a testament to a quiet strength nurtured in harsh conditions, was not seen as resilience by the townspeople, but as a moral failing. In a land where scarcity was a daily battle, her generous curves were labeled a sin of excess, a visible mark of something deemed unseemly and burdensome. The whispers followed her like a shadow, clinging to her like the dust on her worn skirts. Every glance was a judgment, every hushed conversation a fresh lash across her already tender spirit. Eliza endured it all with a quiet dignity. Her eyes, though often downcast, held a depth that belied her youthful years, a deep-seated knowing of the world's harshness. She saw the fear in their eyes, the fear of difference, the fear of the unknown, and understood, perhaps even before they did, that her future here was a dark and uncertain canvas. Her days were a tapestry, woven with mundane tasks and pervasive loneliness. She gathered wild berries from the edges of the forest, her thick fingers deft and quick, her mind often wandering to the quiet solace of the ancient trees. She mended torn garments for the few who would tolerate her presence, her stitches neat and strong, a hidden talent that went largely unnoticed. She kept to herself, a ghost in her own town, her laughter a forgotten sound, yet within her, a stubborn ember of hope persisted, a yearning for a place where she might be seen, truly seen, beyond the shallow confines of their narrow gaze. She dreamt of vast open spaces, of air that tasted of freedom, places where the wind didn't carry the sting of judgment, but the promise of something wild and untamed. What the town failed to comprehend in their haste to label and dismiss was the profound strength that resided within Eliza. Her very build, which they scorned, was a silent testament to a constitution far more enduring than their own. She was built for survival, forged in the quiet crucible of her own self-reliance. This was a truth that lay dormant within her, a potential yet untapped, waiting for the right moment, the right challenge, to ignite. The mountains, those ancient brooding sentinels that watched over the valley, seemed to mirror a wildness in her soul that Pine Ridge had deliberately tried to extinguish. They held secrets, much like her, waiting for discovery. The sun beat down relentlessly on the town's dusty main street, illuminating every flaw, every crack in the veneer of civility. The air hung heavy with anticipation, an oppressive silence broken only by the buzzing of flies and the nervous shuffling of feet. The day of her utter humiliation had arrived, masquerading as a necessary civic function. The town elders, having decided that Eliza could no longer be tolerated as a drain on their non-existent charity, had convened an auction, not for livestock nor for goods, but for a life service. An improvised platform, crudely fashioned from rough-hewn planks, stood before the general store, a stark stage for her public degradation. Eliza stood upon it, her gaze fixed resolutely on the dried mud beneath her worn boots, refusing to meet the eyes of the gathered crowd. The auctioneer, a man whose voice usually boomed with Sunday sermons, now blared a different kind of gospel. He spoke of her sturdy constitution and strong hands, words meant to disguise the true nature of the transaction. $1. The opening bid fell into the hushed anticipation, A stone dropped into a bottomless well, sealing her fate as less than human, less than nothing, in the collective eyes of her so-called community. The silence that followed was deafening, a testament to the town's collective assent to this profound injustice. Her heart, though bruised, refused to break entirely. Deep within her, a silent rebellion stirred, a recognition that this was not the end, but perhaps the agonizing beginning of something else entirely. She had no idea how drastically her world was about to shatter and reform, nor the imposing silent figure who was already making his way down from the unforgiving peaks, about to shatter the town's complacent cruelty forever. The dollar, a paltry sum that echoed with the town's contempt, hung heavy in the air, a physical weight pressing down on Eliza's weary shoulders. The auctioneer's call, thin and reedy, sought any further bids, but the crowd remained silent, their collective agreement a suffocating shroud. She heard the rustle of their clothes, the murmur of their suppressed titters, and felt the burning shame crawl up her neck. Her fate was sealed, her life reduced to the cheapest of transactions, a commodity discarded and then grudgingly accepted at a price so low it stripped her of all dignity. The world, as she knew it, had truly shrunk to the size of that wooden platform, offering no escape, no solace. Then a ripple moved through the tightly packed faces. It wasn't a sudden gasp or a cheer, but a slow, almost reverent parting of the crowd, as if an invisible force cleared a path. From the shadow where the distant mountains cast their long afternoon embrace, a figure emerged. He moved with a quiet power, each step deliberate, unhurried, yet carrying an undeniable momentum. The air itself seemed to cool around him, infused with the crisp, clean scent of pine and distant snow, a stark contrast to the dust and sweat of the valley folk. This was the mountain man, Jedediah. His name was whispered more often in fearful tales around Pine Ridge's hearths than spoken directly. He was a creature of myth and legend, his presence as imposing and untamed as the peaks he called home. Clad in sturdy buckskin, weathered by countless seasons, he seemed carved from the very granite of the high country. His gaze, deep set beneath a brow furrowed by the elements, held the stoic stillness of a winter lake, revealing nothing, yet seeming to encompass everything. He was an outsider in every sense, his very presence a challenge to the established order of the valley. He paused, his eyes sweeping over the scene, the smirking auctioneer, the bewildered crowd, and Eliza, a fragile knot of shame and terror upon the crude platform. His face remained impassive, betraying no emotion, yet in that stillness, an immense force seemed to gather. The oppressive silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets, was shattered by his voice. It was a low rumble, not loud, but resonant, carrying the weight of ancient forests and echoing canyons. It seemed to vibrate the very ground, silencing every whisper, every nervous cough. He did not address the sputtering auctioneer directly, but the entire assembly, his words a quiet thunder that commanded attention. He declared the paltry sum of $1 not merely a price but an insult not just to Eliza, but to the very notion of human worth. In that moment, a subtle shift occurred. It was not just an interruption, it was a redefinition of value, a silent challenge to the town's distorted morality. For him, the price wasn't about her labor, but about the profound disrespect woven into their offer. Then, to the collective astonishment of Pine Ridge, he spoke his true offer. $300, he proclaimed, his voice unwavering, a decree rather than a negotiation. $300 in gold. The words hung in the air, glittering with an impossible weight. It was a sum that could purchase half the main street, enough to buy their store, their saloon, perhaps even their very pride. It was a declaration so bold, so utterly unexpected, that it stunned the villagers into a stunned, disbelieving silence. The auctioneer, his face a mask of shock, fumbled for words, his usual boisterous confidence dissolving into a choked gurgle. The crowd recoiled, a collective intake of breath, as if the sheer audacity of the offer had struck them physically. The wooden hammer, usually a symbol of quick finality, fell with a hesitant, almost reluctant thud, sealing an agreement that none in Pine Ridge truly comprehended. They saw a transaction, a man buying a servant. He had made a declaration, an act of defiant valuing that pierced through their collective scorn. Eliza, who had braced herself for the ignominy of being handed over for a single coin, felt a bewildering rush of emotions. Shock, disbelief, a tremor of fear, but also, surprisingly, a flicker of something akin to awe. He had not looked at her as a burden, but as something worthy of immense, almost reckless value. Her heart, which had been beating a frantic drum against her ribs, now slowed to a heavy throb. She watched as Jedediah, with a gesture as solid and unyielding as the mountains behind him, dropped a small pouch of gold onto the counter. The metallic clink resonated, a clear, defiant sound against the valley's silence. He then turned, his gaze briefly meeting hers. In those deep, unreadable eyes she saw no judgment, no pity, only a quiet expectation. The journey began immediately, the valley folk parting before them as if Jedediah carried an invisible, formidable shield. Eliza followed him, her steps uncertain, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and dawning hope. She was not a servant being led to a new master. She was a soul plucked from the precipice of despair, yet still trembling with the lingering tremors of fear. She did not know his intentions, nor the nature of the life that awaited her. But with each step away from the grumbling whispers and the judging eyes of Pine Ridge, she felt a subtle shift within her. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stale dust she left behind. She cast a single fleeting glance back at the town, now shrinking in the distance, its buildings a cluster of faded memories already receding into the past. It was the last she would see of Pine Ridge, a place that had offered her nothing but scorn. Before her lay the vast, brooding presence of the mountains, a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. They looked formidable, unyielding, a world of hardship and challenge. Yet, in their immense quietude, she sensed a different kind of promise, a sanctuary from the petty cruelties of man. With a deep, shuddering breath, Eliza turned her back on her old life, taking a resolute step onto the winding mountain path. She was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind a world that had deemed her worthless and entering another, where a silent giant had declared her worth more than gold, a journey into wilderness both terrifying and, perhaps, gloriously free. The ascent into the high country was relentless, a stark physical challenge that mirrored the emotional chasm Eliza was crossing. The trail, barely more than a deer path, wound through ancient forests where sunlight dappled through a thick canopy of pine and spruce. With every upward step, the air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant snowmelt. Eliza, despite her robust build, felt the burn in her lungs, her legs aching with the effort. Yet a strange exhilaration began to mix with her fatigue. Each tree, each rock, each glimpse of the world shrinking below, felt like a deliberate shedding of her past, a physical severing of the ties that bound her to Pine Ridge. Jedediah, walking ahead with the silent grace of a seasoned predator, never looked back, never offered a word of encouragement or complaint. His presence was a constant, unyielding force, guiding her deeper into the wild heart of the mountains. He moved as if he were part of the landscape, his moccasins making no sound on the forest floor, his body perfectly attuned to the uneven terrain. Eliza watched him, a figure of both intimidation and undeniable power, and wondered what kind of man lived in such a place so far removed from the petty cruelties of the valley. She knew nothing of him, save for his sudden, shocking act of defiance. He had paid a fortune for her, yet had not spoken another word since. As dusk began to paint the sky with streaks of violet and gold, they emerged from the dense woods into a small, secluded clearing. There, nestled against the sheer rock face of a towering peak, stood a cabin. It was a rustic structure, built of rough-hewn logs, its chimney emitting a faint curl of smoke that whispered promises of warmth. This was his sanctuary, his stronghold against the world, and now it was to be her new uncertain home. The smell of burning pine and something wild, like dried herbs or curing meat, drifted on the crisp air. It was a humble dwelling, yet in its sturdy defiance against the wilderness, Eliza saw a reflection of the man who built it. Jedediah stopped at the cabin's entrance, turning to face her for the first time since leaving the valley. The fading light softened the harsh lines of his face, but his eyes remained an enigma, two dark pools reflecting the gathering twilight. He did not invite her in with words, but with a silent gesture, a slight inclination of his head towards the open door. Eliza hesitated, a tremor of apprehension running through her. This was the threshold to her new life, a place where the rules of the valley no longer applied. What new set of challenges awaited her within these walls? Inside, the cabin was Spartan yet meticulously ordered. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth glowing with a steady, comforting fire that cast dancing shadows across the room. Pelts of various animals lay scattered on the dirt floor, some as rugs, others draped over a crude wooden bed. Tools hung from pegs, knives gleamed on a small workbench, and shelves held jars of dried herbs and carefully preserved foods. Everything had a purpose, a place, a testament to a life lived deliberately, without excess or waste. This was not a home built for comfort but for survival, a bulwark against the raw power of the mountain. Jedediah moved to the hearth, stirring the embers, the flames momentarily illuminating the rugged planes of his face. He spoke then, his voice low, resonating with the quiet authority of the place. He explained, not with warmth, but with a matter-of-fact directness, that she would have her own space, a small sleeping area partitioned by a rough blanket in the corner. He laid out the expectations: work, respect for the land, and an understanding of the mountain's unforgiving nature. There was no pity in his voice, no condescension, only the stark reality of their shared existence in this harsh environment. He did not offer kindness, but rather a sanctuary born of necessity. He spoke of his reasons for bringing her here, not in terms of charity, but of a misplaced sense of justice. He said the town had defiled itself, not only by its cruelty to her, but by its willingness to sell a human soul for so little. He had not bought a servant, he explained, but had salvaged what they had deemed worthless, defying their twisted sense of morality. He would not be her master, but her teacher, guiding her to understand the ways of the mountain, a place where strength was measured not by appearance, but by resilience, cunning, and an unshakable will to endure. He had seen the quiet fire in her eyes, the steadfastness in her bearing, a quality the valley had overlooked. As the days turned into weeks, Eliza slowly began to adapt to the rhythm of mountain life. She learned to chop wood, her powerful shoulders aching at first, then growing stronger with each swing of the axe. She learned to draw water from the icy stream, to tend to the small garden Jedediah cultivated, and to prepare simple, nourishing meals from the stores they kept. She learned to read the signs of the forest, the rustle of leaves that meant deer, the distant cry of a hawk circling for prey. Jedediah, ever the silent mentor, would point out tracks in the snow, demonstrate how to set a snare, or show her which berries were safe to eat. He taught her not with words alone, but with actions, with patience, with the quiet expectation that she would learn, that she would survive. Yet, despite the nascent peace she found in the rigorous routine, an unspoken tension lingered. She was a refugee in his domain, and he, her unexpected rescuer. The question of her place, her true purpose in this isolated world, remained. The mountain did not offer charity. It demanded labor, respect, and contribution. She knew her stay was conditional, her refuge earned not by the sum he paid, but by the utility she proved. Jedediah had provided shelter, food, and the chance for a new beginning. But she understood, with a chilling clarity, that this was not a gift without expectation. The mountain, and the man who called it home, offered sanctuary, but only in exchange for her unwavering will to survive, to contribute, and to respect the immutable laws of that wild, unforgiving place. The first weeks in the high country were a crucible for Eliza, forging her spirit anew amidst the raw challenges of survival. Her days were a relentless cycle of physical exertion, a stark contrast to the stagnant shame of Pine Ridge. She learned the rhythmic swing of the axe, splitting logs that yielded fragrant bursts of pine. Her hands, once soft from less demanding tasks, grew calloused and strong, mirroring the burgeoning resilience in her soul. She hauled water from the frigid stream, its glacial touch a bracing shock each morning. Jedediah watched, silent and observant, his eyes missing nothing, yet offering no overt praise, only a quiet nod of acknowledgement when a task was completed to his exacting standards. He taught her the ways of the wilderness, how to track deer by the subtle disturbance of moss, how to identify edible plants amidst a sea of green, how to tie knots that would hold against a mountain gale. He showed her how to prepare game, teaching her respect for the life that sustained them. Eliza, in turn, discovered a deep inherent capability within herself. Her robust frame, once a source of humiliation, proved to be an unexpected asset. She possessed an enduring stamina, a steady hand, and a surprising aptitude for learning the intricate dance of mountain survival. She learned to listen to the whispers of the wind, to discern the distant crack of a branch, to feel the subtle shifts in the weather. The wilderness, unlike the town, judged her not by her appearance, but by her actions, by her ability to endure and contribute. Slowly, imperceptibly, Eliza began to transform the sparse cabin from a mere dwelling into something more. Jedediah's home was a place of efficiency, every item serving a practical purpose. But Eliza, with her quiet touch, began to infuse it with warmth. She saw the fraying edge of a bearskin rug and, with the worn needle and thread she had salvaged from her meager belongings, mended it with precise, strong stitches. She noticed the lack of proper storage for their dried herbs, and, recalling methods from her youth, began to weave small baskets from flexible willow branches she found along the stream, organizing the cabin with an intuitive grace. One evening, as Jedediah returned from checking his traps, a heavy snowfall blanketing his shoulders, he paused at the doorway. The cabin, usually lit by the harsh utilitarian glow of a single tallow candle, now emanated a softer, more inviting light. Eliza had found a way to filter the light through a jar filled with snow, and carefully placed dried wildflowers, casting a subtle golden hue. A pot of venison stew simmered over the fire, its rich aroma filling the air, a scent far more complex than his usual functional fare. He watched her for a long moment, stirring the stew, her movements fluid and purposeful. He saw the neat rows of herbs, the mended pelts, the subtle, almost imperceptible changes that had transformed his solitary refuge. He said nothing, but a flicker of something unreadable, a momentary softening passed through his unyielding eyes. It was not her physical strength, though that was undeniable, but her quiet resilience, her inherent kindness, and her homemaking skills that began to subtly shift Jedediah's perception of her. She cared for the space, not just as a duty, but with a gentle hand that infused warmth into the starkness. She began to treat minor ailments with remedies learned from her grandmother, brewing teas from mountain herbs for Jedediah's occasional aches. The cabin, once merely a place to survive, was slowly, steadily, becoming a sanctuary of genuine comfort, a home. Yet the mountain, in its majestic indifference, also held dangers. One particularly harsh morning, a fierce blizzard descended without warning, trapping them within the cabin. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, tearing at the logs, threatening to pry loose the very foundations of their shelter. A large branch, heavy with ice and snow, snapped from a nearby pine, crashing perilously close to the cabin, threatening their small supply of gathered firewood. Panic, raw and visceral, threatened to consume Eliza. Jedediah, ever the pragmatist, assessed the damage, his face grim. Their main cache of dry wood, carefully stacked against an exterior wall, was now buried and exposed to the rapidly accumulating snow, risking rot and rendering it useless for days. The bitter cold was already seeping into the cabin, threatening to deplete their warmth faster than they could replenish it. Eliza, seeing the immediate danger and Jedediah's furrowed brow, did not hesitate. Drawing on a quiet strength born of sheer necessity, she grabbed a shovel and, despite the biting wind and blinding snow, began to dig. relentlessly, tirelessly, at the snowdrift covering their precious firewood. Her movements were clumsy at first, but driven by a fierce determination. She would not allow them to freeze, not after all she had endured. Jedediah, observing her unwavering resolve from the doorway, a look of profound surprise on his face, quickly joined her. Together, battling the savage elements, they managed to uncover enough wood to last through the worst of the storm. As the blizzard raged on, casting the mountain in a shroud of white fury, their small victory felt monumental. They had faced the mountain's wrath and, for now, had prevailed. But as the storm finally began to abate, bringing with it a deceptive calm, a new, unforeseen challenge arose. The snow had not just brought a tempest, but had also erased the familiar landscape. Jedediah, venturing out early the next morning, returned with a grim expression. He had scouted the surrounding area, but the usual game trails were obliterated, the familiar markers buried beneath an impossible depth of snow. Their provisions, while not immediately critical, were finite. The long, brutal winter had just begun, and the mountain, in its silent, formidable way, had just presented them with its most brutal challenge yet, a direct threat to their very survival, hinting at a winter of unprecedented scarcity and hardship. The aftermath of the blizzard left the mountain shrouded in a silence both profound and menacing. The snow, a pristine blanket over the landscape, had also buried the vital signs of life beneath its crushing weight. Jedediah, usually so self-sufficient, found his meticulous planning challenged by the unprecedented depth of the drifts. Game, driven deeper into protected hollows, became elusive ghosts. Their small stores of provisions, while carefully rationed, dwindled with each passing day. A gnawing worry began to settle in the cabin, a quiet dread that whispered of a winter more brutal than any Jedediah had known. One frigid morning, Jedediah returned from a fruitless hunt, his face etched with worry. A rare sight for a man usually so impassive. His usual source for winter game, a specific network of deer trails leading to a hidden spring, was completely impassable, buried under an avalanche of snow. Their food supplies were now critically low, the last remnants of dried venison and hardtack staring back from their nearly empty shelves. A deep cough, rough and persistent, had begun to plague him, a dangerous sign in the thin mountain air. Eliza watched him, her heart heavy. His strength, though formidable, could not overcome the sheer force of a winter that threatened to consume them. Eliza, remembering the stories her grandmother told of surviving harsh winters, began to search for solutions where Jedediah saw only dead ends. She had observed him, watched his methods, and absorbed his teachings. Now, she began to apply her own quiet wisdom. She recalled his description of the deer trails, not just as paths, but as arteries leading to life-giving water. She also remembered his casual mention of a specific hardy type of lichen that grew on south-facing rocks, a rare find that deer often sought out when other forage was scarce. With a sudden burst of inspiration, Eliza realized that while the trails were buried, the lichen patches might still be accessible in certain, less exposed areas. She remembered a particular rock formation, a large, sun-warmed granite outcropping Jedediah had once pointed out during a foraging lesson, saying it caught the sun just right, even in winter. She proposed a daring new strategy. Instead of following the buried trails, they would search for the specific lichen patches, believing the deer would be drawn to them out of desperation. Jedediah, initially skeptical, saw the spark of a different kind of cunning in her eyes, a wisdom born not of brute force, but of observation and an intuitive understanding of life's subtle patterns. He agreed, a silent testament to his growing trust in her judgment. The journey to the sun-warmed granite outcropping was fraught with peril. They traversed deep snow, their boots sinking with every step, the cold biting at their exposed skin. Eliza, using her innate sense of direction honed by weeks of quiet observation, led the way, navigating treacherous slopes and hidden ravines. Finally, after hours of arduous travel, they reached the outcropping. Miraculously, a patch of the hardy lichen, green against the white, had been exposed by the sun's persistent warmth, attracting a small herd of deer. Jedediah, with a swift, clean shot, secured a deer, its meat a literal lifeline in the deepening winter. The relief that washed over them was profound, a shared breath of survival. Back in the relative warmth of the cabin, the tension broke. The sheer, overwhelming relief of having overcome the immediate threat softened the hardened edges of their solitude. As the venison roasted over the fire, its rich aroma filling the air, a different kind of hunger began to emerge, a hunger for understanding, for connection. Jedediah, his usual reserve momentarily shattered by the closeness of death and the profound gratitude for Eliza's insight, spoke of his past. He revealed the crushing weight of his loneliness, the quiet grief for a wife and child lost years ago to a sudden mountain fever, a tragedy that had driven him into the isolated solitude of the peaks, seeking refuge from a world that had betrayed him. He spoke of the guilt, the helplessness, the way the silence had become both his prison and his only comfort. Eliza listened, her heart aching with empathy. Then, with a courage born of their shared vulnerability, she reciprocated. She spoke of the abandonment, the sting of being cast out by her own family, of the public humiliation in Pine Ridge. She confessed the quiet despair, the feeling of being utterly unwanted, a burden on a world that had no place for her. She spoke of her fear that Jedediah had merely bought her out of some strange sense of duty, that she would always be a tolerated burden. In that shared telling, a profound understanding passed between them. They were both outcasts, scarred by loss and rejection, two solitary souls who had, against all odds, found a fragile sanctuary not just in the cabin, but in each other's presence. As the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows, the initial relief gave way to a deeper, more complex emotion. The immediate threat of starvation had been averted, but the harsh reality of their continued vulnerability remained. Jedediah looked at Eliza, his eyes holding a new depth of understanding, a quiet admiration. She had saved them, not with brute strength, but with a unique perception, a connection to the very pulse of the mountain that he, in his stoic experience, had overlooked. Their partnership, forged in shared hardship, was now sealed not just by necessity, but by a profound mutual respect, a recognition of their interwoven wounds and unspoken strength. Yet, as the quiet understanding settled between them, a new, unsettling sensation stirred. The mountain had just tested them, and they had passed. But the true nature of their rescue, the unexpected bond that had formed, had set them apart from the world in a way neither of them had anticipated, making them vulnerable to forces beyond the cabin, beyond the mountain, a vulnerability that would soon manifest in a most unexpected and challenging way. With the immediate threat of starvation quelled, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. The raw, shared vulnerabilities of the previous night had cleared the air, leaving behind a space for something new to grow. Eliza and Jedediah, once two solitary figures bound by circumstance, now moved with a quiet, unspoken rhythm, a harmonious dance of shared purpose. Days unfolded with a gentle predictability. They worked side by side, gathering firewood, mending traps, and preparing their meals. The chopping of wood, once a laborious chore, became a rhythmic meditation, each swing of the axe a testament to their enduring partnership. Evenings around the crackling fire became a cherished time. Jedediah, slowly shedding his deep-seated reticence, began to share more stories of the mountain, tales of its wild beauty, its unforgiving winters, and the hardy creatures that called it home. Eliza, in turn, spoke of her childhood in the valley, of the quiet joys she once knew before the shadow of rejection fell upon her. Their conversations were not always filled with words. Often they communicated through shared glances, the warmth of a silent presence, the comfort of knowing another soul truly understood. Eliza learned to recognize the subtle shifts in Jedediah's mood, the rare smile that touched his lips, the quiet pride in his eyes when she mastered a new skill. Jedediah, in turn, found himself drawn to her soft laughter, to the way she hummed ancient tunes as she worked, infusing his stark home with a forgotten melody. Their connection deepened, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet intimacy of shared lives. Eliza found herself instinctively reaching for his hand when they navigated treacherous icy paths, a gesture of trust that was reciprocated with a firm, protective clasp. Jedediah, once fiercely independent, now found himself instinctively seeking her input, valuing her quiet wisdom, and relying on her steady presence. The cold, sterile air of his solitary existence began to thaw, replaced by a warmth that emanated from within the cabin, a gentle heat that permeated their shared space. The memory of Pine Ridge and the grief that had haunted Jedediah for so long began to recede, replaced by the burgeoning hope of a future they were slowly, carefully building together. One particularly clear night as they sat by the fire, the stars a dazzling tapestry above the snow-capped peaks, Eliza recounted a fragment of her family history. Her grandmother, she explained, had spoken of a small, distinctive silver locket, passed down through generations, said to bring fortune to its wearer, though it had been lost long ago. Jedediah listened intently, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When she finished, a strange, almost imperceptible tremor passed through him. He rose slowly, moving to a small hidden chest beneath his bed. From within, he carefully retrieved a small, tarnished silver locket, its surface bearing the faint etchings of a mountain flower. He presented it to her, his hand trembling slightly. It was the very locket her grandmother had described, a family heirloom lost to the generations, now miraculously reappearing. Jedediah explained that his own grandmother, a quiet, solitary woman who had lived on the fringes of the valley, had once traded her services as a midwife to a desperate family in exchange for this very locket, believing it held protective powers. He had kept it, a silent tribute to her memory, never truly understanding its full significance until now. The realization hung in the air, a profound and startling truth. Their families, though separated by the valley and the mountain, had been connected by a thread of silver, their destinies subtly intertwined long before they had ever met. It was a revelation that cemented their bond, transforming their accidental meeting into something akin to fate, a shared legacy waiting to be discovered. The days that followed were filled with a profound sense of rightness, a quiet joy that settled deep within their hearts. Their found family, two outcasts brought together by a cruel world and a defiant act, felt complete. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a home, infused with the warmth of shared laughter, quiet affection, and the silent promise of a future built together. They spoke of planting a larger garden in the spring, of expanding their trapping lines, of a life rich with purpose and companionship. The mountain, once a formidable adversary, had become a benevolent protector, its vastness holding their fragile happiness in its quiet embrace. But the wilderness, as they both knew, was fickle. Peace, especially in the high country, was often fleeting. As the last embers of the fire glowed softly one evening, casting long shadows across their peaceful faces, a distant, unsettling sound drifted on the wind. It was not the familiar howl of a wolf, nor the cry of a mountain lion. It was the unmistakable, mournful sound of a horn, a single piercing note that echoed through the valleys, carrying with it a chilling sense of purpose. It was a signal, a human call, but one that spoke not of friendship or welcome, but of intrusion, of a world from which they had sought refuge, now encroaching on their sanctuary. Jedediah's eyes, which had softened with contentment, hardened once more, reflecting the ancient vigilance of a man who knew the mountain's dangers extended far beyond its wild creatures. The fragile peace they had so carefully built was about to be tested once again, not by the mountain, but by the relentless, encroaching shadows of humanity from the valley below. The distant horn blast, thin and sharp on the cold mountain air, pierced the fragile peace they had cultivated. It was a sound that belonged to the world below, a jarring intrusion that brought with it the bitter taste of memory. Jedediah's face, which had softened over the quiet weeks, tightened with a grim resolve. He knew the signals of the valley, and this one spoke of pursuit, of an unwanted presence encroaching upon his sanctuary. Eliza felt a chill deeper than the mountain air, a dread that seeped into her bones. Her past, the very cruelty she had escaped, was now on their doorstep. For days, Jedediah moved with a heightened sense of vigilance. He scouted the outer perimeter of their clearing, his eyes scanning for any sign of disturbance. He reinforced their cabin's defenses, securing the heavy door and shuttering the windows, transforming their home back into a fortress. He taught Eliza how to load his rifle, how to stand firm, how to listen for the telltale crunch of footsteps on snow. She in turn discovered a fierce protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer a victim. She was a defender of her newfound home, of the man who had given her solace, of the life they had painstakingly built together. The threat manifested itself slowly, insidiously. First, there were subtle signs: a snapped twig where no animal should have been, a set of unfamiliar tracks half buried by new snow, a wisp of smoke caught on the wind from a distance too close for comfort. Then, the true nature of the threat became sickeningly clear. A lone figure appeared at the edge of their clearing, a man from Pine Ridge, thin and wiry, his face contorted by a vengeful sneer. It was Elias Thorne, the very man who had presided over the auction, the auctioneer whose gavel had condemned Eliza. He did not approach the cabin directly, but stood at a distance, his presence a brazen challenge. He carried no weapon, but in his eyes was a chilling possessiveness, a cold determination to reclaim what he believed was rightfully theirs. He was not there to attack the cabin, but to take Eliza, to drag her back to the world from which she had escaped, a world where she was seen as property, as a burden, as something to be bought and sold. Jedediah stood at the cabin door, rifle in hand, his gaze unwavering. Thorne, emboldened by the mountain man's stillness, called out, his voice echoing with calculated malice. He claimed Eliza was a fugitive, a runaway servant, and that Jedediah was aiding and abetting. He spoke of community justice and unpaid debts, veiled threats that hinted at the violence Pine Ridge was capable of. He declared that the townspeople had sent him, that they sought to correct the wrong of Jedediah's outrageous bid, to restore the natural order. But Jedediah knew better. He saw the avarice in Thorne's eyes, the desire to claim the valuable woman, to settle old scores, and perhaps to gain favor with the community leaders. As the standoff intensified, Thorne made a critical error. He mentioned a name, a local magistrate, a man known for his strict adherence to the law, even if that law was twisted by local prejudices. He claimed this magistrate had sanctioned his pursuit, eager to see the mountain man humbled and Eliza brought to heel. But as Thorne spoke, Eliza recalled a hushed conversation she had once overheard in Pine Ridge, a secret whispered among the womenfolk. The magistrate, a man of rigid public rectitude, secretly harbored a profound resentment for Elias Thorne, whom he considered a petty schemer. The idea that this magistrate would openly endorse Thorne's unauthorized pursuit, especially after Jedediah's public display of wealth, felt utterly false. Thorne was acting alone, driven by his own petty vendetta, using the town's name as a shield. The cold truth settled in Eliza's mind. This was not the town's official reprisal, but a personal vendetta by Elias Thorne, masked by the pretense of communal justice. He had taken advantage of the town's lingering resentment, twisting their fear of the mountain man and their disdain for Eliza into a personal crusade. The true threat was not the collective might of Pine Ridge, but the singular, calculating malice of one man. As Thorne continued his taunts, his voice growing bolder, Jedediah's grip on his rifle tightened. He would protect Eliza, of that there was no doubt. He would fight for her, for their home, for the life they had forged. But Eliza knew a direct confrontation would be bloody, perhaps even deadly, and would likely draw more unwanted attention. She understood Thorne's true weakness, his pride, his need for public validation, his desire to not just take her, but to be seen as a hero for doing so. She also knew his secret, the magistrate's true feelings, a detail that could be used against him. With a sudden, decisive clarity, Eliza stepped forward, her voice ringing out, clear and steady, cutting through Thorne's bluster. She offered herself as a temporary solution, not as a surrender, but as a tactical maneuver. She would return with Thorn, but only if Jedediah was left unmolested, and only if Thorn presented a letter, openly endorsed by the magistrate, confirming his official authority. She looked directly at Jedediah, a silent message passing between them. Trust me. It was a bold gamble, a terrifying sacrifice, but she knew it was their only chance to de-escalate the immediate threat, to expose Thorn's deceit, and to buy them precious time. She was sacrificing her own fragile safety, placing herself in immediate peril, all to protect Jedediah and the sanctuary they had built, buying time to unmask the true nature of their pursuer. Eliza's proposition hung heavy in the frigid air, a desperate gamble that silenced Elias Thorn's bluster. Jedediah stood motionless, his eyes blazing with fierce protection. But he saw the unshakable resolve in Eliza's gaze. He trusted her. With a curt nod that conveyed both his agreement and his silent promise of retribution, he lowered his rifle. Thorn, momentarily caught off guard by the unexpected turn, quickly recovered, a triumphant smirk twisting his lips. He believed he had won, that the mountain man had been outsmarted, and the defiant woman brought to heel. The journey back to the valley was a bitter reversal of Eliza's escape. Thorn, puffed with his perceived victory, wasted no time in parading her through the dusty streets of Pine Ridge. He dragged her before the magistrate, a man named Henderson, a stout, stern figure known for his rigid adherence to the letter of the law. Thorn, beaming, presented Eliza as the runaway he had recaptured, demanding her formal assignment as a permanent indentured servant, and seeking public commendation for his efforts. The townspeople, a familiar throng of curious and judgmental faces, gathered, eager to witness Eliza's renewed humiliation. But Eliza was no longer the shrinking, broken girl they had once known. Her time on the mountain had forged a quiet strength, a clarity of purpose. As Thorn launched into his self-congratulatory speech, claiming the magistrate's full endorsement, Eliza interrupted him, her voice clear and resonant, carrying the authority of truth. She spoke of the horn Jedediah had heard, the one Thorn had used to announce his approach. A detail Thorn had carelessly assumed was a sign of his official standing. She then referenced the magistrate's supposed backing, calmly stating that she would not agree to any terms without a written order, directly signed by Magistrate Henderson, proving Thorn's claims. She spoke of her grandmother's locket, a symbol of her lineage, and pointedly stated that a woman of her heritage, even if impoverished, was not to be treated as chattel without due process. Magistrate Henderson, a man obsessed with procedure and legal decorum, was visibly perturbed. He despised Thorn's bombast and loathed any implication of impropriety in his own conduct. He knew nothing of a horn, nor had he ever given Thorn official permission to pursue Eliza. He had merely, months ago, expressed a general sentiment that something should be done about the vagrant girl, never imagining such a crude and public spectacle. Thorn, caught in his own web of fabrication, stammered, his face blanching. He had no such letter, no official decree, only his own arrogant assumptions and the town's quiet prejudice to back him. The silence that followed Eliza's calm, unwavering declaration was deafening. The crowd, sensing a shift in the power dynamics, began to murmur. They saw the magistrate's displeasure and the sudden, frantic desperation in Thorn's eyes. Henderson, his reputation for fairness now on the line, turned his steely gaze upon Thorn. He declared that Elias Thorn had acted without authority, that his actions were an affront to both the law and the dignity of the court. He accused Thorn of gross misrepresentation and of disturbing the peace. The tables had turned, not with violence, but with the incisive power of truth and legal procedure. Just as Thorn's bravado completely collapsed, a familiar figure emerged from the edges of the crowd. It was Jedediah, his silhouette dark and imposing against the setting sun. He had followed them, not to intervene directly in the town's legal system, but to bear witness and to act if Eliza's gambit failed. He carried no weapon now, his hands open, But his presence was a silent, formidable declaration. He stood as a pillar of unwavering support, his eyes fixed on Eliza, a silent acknowledgement of her bravery and cunning. The townspeople recoiled, some in fear, others in awe, as the mythic mountain man now stood openly among them, his presence affirming Eliza's claims. Magistrate Henderson, eager to salvage his authority and perhaps even to quietly spite Thorne, then delivered his final judgment. He declared Eliza a free woman, absolved of any debt or servitude to the town. He decreed that Elias Thorne, for his unauthorized actions and false claims, would pay a substantial fine to the court, and for good measure would be made to publicly apologize to Eliza for his egregious conduct. Thorne, humiliated and defeated, was dragged away by the sheriff, his protests fading into the general clamor. The dust of the valley settled, but the world had irrevocably changed. Eliza, once scorned, now stood vindicated. Jedediah, once an isolated myth, had revealed himself as a man of honor. The immediate threat was neutralized, Thorne's malice rendered impotent by Eliza's shrewdness, and the magistrate's unexpected if self-serving decree. Yet as Eliza turned to Jedediah, a quiet smile gracing her lips, a final, unsettling thought lingered. Pine Ridge had been shown its hypocrisy, its cruelty exposed. But the bitterness, the prejudice, the deep-seated disdain for what was different, still lay dormant beneath the surface, a subtle poison that would not easily dissipate. They had won this battle, but the valley, and the world beyond the mountain, remained a place where new challenges, new judgments could always arise, demanding vigilance and an unyielding spirit. 9 months later, the mountain cabin, once a stark refuge, pulsed with a warmth and vibrancy that transformed it completely. The harsh grip of winter had long since yielded to the soft embrace of spring, and now the vibrant colors of summer painted the peaks. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous profusion, bees hummed in the sun-drenched air, and the distant call of an eagle echoed through the canyons. Inside, the cabin was no longer a place of quiet survival, but a bustling, joyful home. Jedediah, once a solitary figure, now moved with a new lightness, his eyes reflecting a contentment that had eluded him for years. Eliza, her frame now softened by the gentle curve of pregnancy, sat by the hearth, mending a small, intricately embroidered garment. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and the earthy aroma of herbs drying by the fire. The cabin, once a place of silence, now hummed with the quiet sounds of domesticity, of two lives intertwined, preparing for a future far grander than either had dared to imagine. One afternoon, as Jedediah returned from checking his snares, he found Eliza beaming, a special glow radiating from her. In her hand, she held not just the mended garment, but a simple, beautifully carved wooden rattle fashioned from a piece of smooth maple. It was a gift for their unborn child, a symbol of the new life about to blossom in their mountain sanctuary. As he took it, his rough fingers tracing the delicate carvings, Eliza pointed to a small, intricate symbol etched into the wood, a soaring eagle above a hidden spring. She explained that she had learned, from an old mountain woman they occasionally encountered on rare trips to trade, that this symbol was an ancient mark of the high country tribes, a blessing for abundant life and safe passage. Jedediah's gaze lingered on the symbol, a flash of recognition in his eyes. He then produced a small leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, from his hidden chest. It was his grandmother's, the same woman who had possessed Eliza's locket. Within its delicate script, she had recorded not just remedies and mountain lore, but also fragments of her own lineage. She had been of the mountain folk, a descendant of the very tribes Eliza had mentioned, a people who had lived in harmony with these peaks for centuries. The symbol Eliza had carved was her grandmother's mark, a silent inheritance that connected them not just by marriage, but by a deep, ancestral tie to the land itself. Eliza's lineage, dismissed and scorned by the valley, had an ancient, powerful connection to this mountain, a right to belong that transcended any human decree. Her arrival had not been an accident, but a return, a reawakening of a dormant heritage. The revelation resonated deeply, casting a new light on their entire journey. Eliza had not just found a home. She had returned to her ancestral lands. Jedediah had not just rescued a stranger. He had unknowingly welcomed back a descendant of the mountain, healing a fracture in time. Their union, soon to be sealed by the birth of their child, was more than a love story. It was a reweaving of ancient threads, a promise of continuity. As the sun dipped below the western peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues, Eliza leaned against Jedediah, his arm wrapped securely around her. The familiar sounds of the mountain surrounded them, a symphony of crickets, distant owls, and the gentle sigh of the wind through the pines. The world below, with its petty judgments and fleeting cruelties, seemed a distant, insignificant memory. Here, in the heart of the high country, they had found more than mere survival. They had discovered that true strength lay not in rigid conformity, but in the courage to be different, to stand against the tide. Their home, built by strong hands and fortified by enduring love, was a testament to resilience, a beacon of hope in a world that often sought to dim the light of those deemed unworthy. Their story would echo through the valleys, not as a tale of a sail or a rescue, but as a legend of transformation. It was a quiet truth, understood by the mountain and by their own beating hearts, that a woman once valued at $1 had proved her worth in gold, and a solitary man, burdened by grief, had found his greatest treasure not in isolation, but in the boundless joy of a shared life. The family they forged, built on mutual respect and unwavering protection, would be the truest legacy, proving that home was not a fixed place but a feeling of profound belonging, sculpted by love and secured by the fierce, unyielding spirit of the mountain itself. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.